Welcome to Transform and Transformational, Teach Beyond Podcast. I'm Kian.
And I'm Heather. We're here to explore what it means to be transformed in our own lives and how that overflows to living lives of transformational impact in our communities.
Today we get to hear from some of our very own Teach Beyond team as we are discussing 10 ways to prepare to serve in missions. Heather, I'm so curious if you can tell us why this is a topic that is so important to you.
Yeah, this is a topic that is very close to my heart because there's lots of times that my team has conversations with people who just aren't ready to serve in missions yet, but have a real desire to do something in the meantime. I'm thinking of the underclassman student, the sophomore, the junior, the caregiver who is not in a position to relocate at this time, or someone who's anticipating retirement a few years from now. You know, these different life circumstances that can cause it just not to be the right time right now. But, there's something about, wanting to go in missions and also the reality that we can all be involved in what God's doing and all be a part of global missions wherever we are. So, we're going to walk through some different ideas today that can help us use our time intentionally now as we discern or prepare for the future, but also recognizing that those things aren't wasted now. It's not just for the future preparation, but also for our formation, for our impact right where we are.
That's great. I'm so excited about this. And what's great about this conversation we're about to listen to is that we're not just going to hear from you, but also a couple members of your team. You lead the mobilization team. Can you tell us what is that? What is mobilization?
Right. I live in a city where there's a lot of physical therapy and, people in health professions. And so I have to explain this a lot that actually missions mobilization is about connecting people, mobilizing them to serve in the ways that God has gifted them, in the ways that he's leading them. Right. So it's not recruitment. It's not even just the specifics of, we want you to do this thing. It's how is God leading you? It's questions, it's presenting opportunities. And so our role is to facilitate that whole process from the first time someone inquires on our website or stops by a recruiting table or, first expresses interest in Teach Beyond, all the way up until the point where they would begin serving. So that's the application and interviewing and orientation, onboarding, things like that. So our team loves getting to walk through that whole process with people and hearing their stories.
Today, we're going to walk through 10 ways to prepare to serve in missions. And I'm so excited to listen to what you guys discuss. Let's go over to that conversation now.
Welcome to the podcast, Rachel and Amanda.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Well, this is really exciting. We get to serve together on the mobilization team. And so being able to interact on this topic is just so fun. So we're going to dive in a minute or two here on some things to maybe be thinking about before we might even have a conversation with someone. But before we dive into that, I'd love for each of you to share where you're located now and where you have served in the past. So let's start with you, Rachel.
Sure. So I am currently located in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. That's where I grew up. And previously I've served in Germany and Spain.
That's great. And taught at two different schools, middle school, right?
Mm-hmm.
At
Yes,
both of
middle
those?
school, math and science. Yep.
We have all served in middle school, actually. So we have that in common. Amanda, you want to share where you have lived and served?
Great. So I currently live in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and I served as a middle school Bible teacher and music teacher in Hillcrest in Nigeria.
And you've lived other places overseas too, right?
I have, yes. I wasn't teaching in those roles, but I have lived in a few different places in Europe and in Canada.
Yeah. So much, so many different experiences. And I love how that gets to play into the conversations that we have every day. Well, I'm so excited to talk together about this topic today as we walk through these 10 specific suggestions for what people can do while they're preparing to serve in missions. And some of these we ourselves have experienced. So I'm looking forward to hearing your personal stories, as well as maybe things we've heard, we've recommended to others. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so the first of these 10 suggestions is to pray. When we talk about prayer being key to preparing for missions, this is praying not only for our own direction, that maybe seems obvious, like, all right, Lord, is this what you want me to do? But also praying intentionally for missionaries, for people in other countries, maybe for specific people groups. So I'd love to hear how this has looked for you, what conversations you've had with people who are intentionally praying.
Yeah, so sometimes it can be hard to know who or what to pray for. There are some really great apps that can provide daily prayer prompts for people groups, for countries. Two examples that come to mind for me are Operation World and Joshua Project.
Nice. I'm going to share from my personal experience as my
Mm,
husband and I were praying about where God was leading us in our next steps. One evening we did an intentional, let's go out for coffee, let's pray about this, and let's talk about what some of our gifts are and how God wants to use us. And then we started searching for possibilities. Once we narrowed down kind of what we were looking at, where we thought God was opening doors, we took a day and actually fasted and prayed and asked God for clear direction to show us
mm.
where he wanted us to go and how he wanted us to
Mhm.
serve.
Yeah, that's so good. You know, what comes to mind for me about prayer is actually going way back to when I was a kid that we had this box on our table and where we'd eat dinner together. We'd then open the prayer box after dinner and there were prayer cards of different missionaries in the little box. And so it was a
Mhm.
visual of these are real people who are serving in real places around the world and kind of
Oh, that's nice.
learning where they were
Yeah.
and then praying for specific things for them. Having
Yeah.
those physical reminders can put it in front of our mind as a practical thing.
Oh, I like that
Mhm.
idea.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it.
Well, number 2 then is, serving right where we are. So looking for opportunities, being, on the lookout for how can I be plugged in? How can I use what God's given me and actually build and grow those skills? Maybe that could be used in the future, but again, those things can be used now too, and benefiting the communities that we're in. It can help with our discernment in the future, but also has an impact now. So, what does that look like for each of you?
Yeah, so for me, I knew that I wanted to teach from a young age, and so I was always looking for opportunities to work with kids in that sort of setting. And so
Mm,
when I was in high school, I had the opportunity to start teaching preschool, Sunday school at my church that I had grown up in, and that was just great for me to get that hands-on experience at a young age. And then later, when I was in college, I also continued to teach the preschool Sunday school class at my college church.
hmm.
Oh, nice. I have taken some music lessons, been very involved in playing piano and things. And so I tended to find opportunities where I could serve using my musical gifts.
Mm,
As a teenager, I was involved in leading worship with my youth group, and then being kind of on our leadership youth group leadership team. And
mm.
then I spent many of my summers actually working at a Christian camp. And so in leadership roles as a camp counselor, as an activity leader, and then getting into again doing music and stuff there as well. And so just I think you commented earlier on using those skills and developing things, and I think it's also serving is a great way to kind of test the waters and find out, do I really like working with kids? Is this
Mhm.
something that I can
Mhm.
see myself doing? You kind of it's a great way to locally start testing out what you're good at, what God's calling you to do. And so
Mm.
yeah, I think it's good.
That's yeah, such a good point, Amanda. And the next one we're going to talk about takes us abroad, but that's so important to mention that doing it here and now and right where we are matters. It you can
Mhm.
actually get a feel for how God's
Mhm.
wired you without ever leaving your town or your country and
Mhm.
and that's so key. Well, number 3 does take us outside of the country borders, so taking a trip internationally. So this could be a short-term mission trip, it could be study abroad, another travel opportunity. This gets us outside our comfort zone, right? Like
Mhm.
getting on a plane or, experiencing a new culture,
Mhm.
and also seeing God at work around the world. I love this, that God is the same God everywhere, and when we see him worshiped in different ways and that people are doing different things to live out their faith, it can really expand our understanding of who he is.
So true.
And of course this can also help to discern where the Lord might be leading us someday. Maybe you take a trip for the express purpose of trying out that place,
Mhm.
but maybe it's just that in the process of being in an area, you realize, I don't think I'm actually, built for living in that part of the world, right?
Mhm.
So there
Mhm.
can be some practical help that comes from taking a trip internationally. Did either of you take short-term trips at all, and did that tie into your desire to go overseas?
I did. Yeah, when I was in high school, the summer before my junior and senior year of high school, I had
Mhm.
the opportunity to go on a short-term trip through my church to Costa Rica.
Hmm.
And the purpose of the trip was multifaceted. We did some, you know, construction work. We did some vacation Bible school and kids ministry. And I had been studying Spanish in high school
Mhm.
and wanted an opportunity to get to test out my language skills with some native speakers, and there were
Nice.
some comical moments there, but, that opportunity was really just great for me. It was my first time out of, North America, my
Mhm.
first time getting to be in a country that didn't speak English, and, just getting to worship alongside people in another language, and it was so neat to see how God understood all of our languages, that we
Mhm.
were all able to worship together. And even though we couldn't understand each other, the Lord understood it all.
Nice.
Another example would be when I was in college, I sang in our women's choir, and I got to go on a 2-week tour with the men's and women's choir to Australia and New Zealand. And that was
Whoa.
very far away. That's the
Yeah.
farthest I've ever been from home. And even though we still spoke English in those countries, the culture was still very different. And it was just really a great opportunity for me to see life outside of my own small little bubble that I had grown up in, to kind of just expand my horizons, learn more about what it looks like to live in another country, to see how things are done differently, and to see how the church functions in other countries. So I was really grateful for both of those opportunities.
Yeah. And, Rachel, you mentioned through your church, through your university, there's so many different opportunities for getting that short term
Mhm.
exposure to other cultures.
Yeah.
And, Teach Beyond does have some short term trips and opportunities to do an internship abroad or to go on an English camp or something like that. And so there are those opportunities even within Teach Beyond to kind of get your feet wet in another culture.
I have a neat story actually of a couple who decided that they were thinking God was calling them into some kind of missions work. They weren't sure. They didn't want to make a big commitment to go for a long time, so they decided to try one of our English camps. And they had an amazing time just last summer. And they decided that they wanted to. That was kind of the stepping stone to, yes, God is calling us
Mhm.
into full time missions. And
Neat.
I'm excited too because spring break is coming, and my daughter is actually going on a missions trip
Hmm.
down in the Dominican. And so she's through her school. It's a neat opportunity for her. And so, having some time in Nigeria, now this is her time to go
Yeah.
as a student then. And so who knows where God is going to direct her
Yeah.
as she
Mhm.
has these overseas experiences. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of cool to see the links of being involved in what living internationally, taking that trip, how that can open doors into the future.
So
Mm.
good. Yeah. Okay, so number 1 was pray, number 2 was serve where you are, number 3, take a trip internationally, and number 4, we've sort of alluded to the connection to church already with some of this, the serving and maybe taking a trip through your church, but getting involved in a missions-minded church is number 4, and it's so important for all of us to be growing spiritually in the setting of a church, but also to learn about missions and be exposed to missions, to be using our gifts within a church context, to be deepening relationships and investing in that church, which could also, if you do serve in missions someday, lead to a meaningful sending relationship, sending partnership. In the future. So, getting involved in a missions minded church now is so key for a number of different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually grew up in a church that was very missions minded. I grew up in a sweet little Nazarene church. It was a very small setting, but very globally minded. We were always hearing stories, reports from missionaries from the field. We were having the missionaries come to our church and share their stories. I remember when I was really young, asking them how to say different phrases in different languages because I thought it was so
That's
fascinating.
great.
And yeah, just having that as a part of the ongoing experience of being in church and what it looks like as a church to be always thinking outward and gospel focused. And so that ultimately developed in me an interest in missions and serving, and what then led me to get to go on my own short term trip with the
Mm.
church.
Mm.
Well, that's really neat.
Mhm.
Um, the church that I grew up in, they had a few missionaries that they supported as well. And so when those missionaries would come home on home assignment, we'd of course get to hear and celebrate with them what God has been doing and hear about their ministry. And I remember as a teenager meeting one of the missionary families that our church supported. And so when they were on home
Mm.
assignment, they came and their kids were around my age. And I remember hearing stories. They'd actually been in Africa doing some work there.
Mm.
And I remember then feeling inspired, like, wow, I want to go. Someday I want to go to Africa. I want to be at a school in Africa. And that just kind of stirred in me that desire. And it wasn't until years later that God opened the door for me to actually do that. But I think it was neat how the seeds were being planted because our church was supporting this family who was working overseas, and so just getting that exposure and hearing about the opportunities became a great part of my journey and my story.
Mm, yeah.
Mhm.
So good. That's like the perfect lead in here to number 5, which is seeking the wisdom from others. And in the cases that you were each sharing there, it wasn't maybe a person you knew personally that you were involving in your own discernment process, but there's wisdom that can be gleaned from afar. And you had that opportunity in the church setting. And then there's also wisdom that can be gleaned through personal relationship up close. So, you know, we definitely encourage inviting trusted mentors, pastors, family members, friends to speak into the discernment process. And, sometimes if you get too many advisors into the mix, it can feel like, wait, I'm hearing different advice from different people, and now there's
Mhm.
just a lot of noise. So, obviously, with wisdom and discernment, bringing people in who can help you have wisdom and discernment. But
Right.
certainly, seeking out people who can walk with you in the journey. And then maybe specifically, there could be, a missionary through your church or someone that you know through your community who you might be able to hear specific stories about their experience that might be a little different than the others in your community who can speak into your journey.
Hmm.
Mhm.
That kind of happened with, my husband and I as we were preparing to go to Nigeria. We, of course, talked to our family, seeking kind of wisdom from our parents as well. Okay, we think God is opening this door, and sort of seeking their blessing and their wisdom in that. We also talked to a close friend of mine because she was a TCK at the school that we were going to, and she was one of our links in the journey. But just to hear her experience and to understand what her family did in Nigeria, how what it was like for her growing up in Nigeria and in that school. And then we ended up talking to another couple who were currently living in Nigeria about, like, what's it like to live there, and tell us a little bit about the culture and things to of what to expect, and and just kind of how God is using them there. And so that was part of our preparations, even just getting ready to go. Just sort of talking with others was a valuable part of that preparing of us mentally getting ready to serve overseas.
Well, number 6 is also relational in a different kind of way, and number 6 is befriend internationals. So, I think this is kind of a different direction, but to right here where we are right now, like we talked about getting plugged in, serving right here right now, it's an opportunity to experience other cultures right where we
Mhm.
live, and to approach those relationships with a posture of learning and hospitality, to understand, to experience together. And I think just like taking a trip out of the country can be really eye opening to learn different cultures. We can learn from other cultures that are right here next door.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I have worked with a lot of applicants who have actually found incredible international friendships in college, whether that would
Mm,
be getting assigned a roommate who was a missionary kid. Amanda,
Yeah.
I loved your mention of your good friend was a TCK at the school that you were interested
Mhm.
in. I've had that with some of my applicants as well. Um, Roommate assignments, being in a choir together. I had many international students in the choir that I sang with. A lot of times, college is your first opportunity to get exposure to those people who come from different places, and
Yeah.
so, yeah.
And that's part of my story. My eyes were opened at Bible college, where I
Mm,
met people
yeah.
from other cultures and also other denominational, like church denomination backgrounds. And I
mm,
love being able to learn and ask questions, learning about their culture, and then ultimately celebrating that what we have in common is our relationship with Jesus. And
mm,
I know, Heather, you even mentioned that earlier, even being in other places, but we're worshiping the same God.
mhm,
It's just looking different in different cultures. And so
mhm,
there's just such
mhm,
a value to spending time with people and learning about their cultures, even because they're now in our space, or
mhm,
we're in the same area. And so
mhm,
that's just it's neat to spend time with people who we can learn from.
mhm. Well, number 7 is give sacrificially to missions. I love this one because it cultivates a heart in us for missions as we invest in missions. And there's kind of a couple parts to this, but on the one hand, investing in missions, like this is a way that we can be part of what God's doing now. We can be connected to and involved in the work. I think we all believe that by giving to missions, we are participating in that. Just like when people have given to us as we've served in missions, they're participating in the work that we're doing. And so as we invest in other missionaries, we can invest in the work that they're doing, that God is working in and through them. And we also then, as we think about the preparation aspect of this, can see firsthand this insight of what is fundraising, what does it look like for there to be, ministry partnership. And so we can learn about missions from the people that we support. We can learn about this connection between the missionary and the supporter by being a supporter. So you can see there's a couple aspects to that.
Yeah, and I mentioned growing up in the Nazarene church, and one of their big, campaigns was the alabaster offering. The alabaster offering comes from Luke 7 and the story of the woman who poured out her expensive perfume at
Hmm.
Jesus's feet, and so the alabaster offerings took place, I think, twice a year, and they would actually give us these little boxes that looked like a brick, and you would just fill it up with your money, and then twice a year, you would bring it and present it, at the offering, and it was for building churches and medical facilities and all kinds of things all around the world that the Nazarene church was able then to go in and uh, serve in those areas. I know other denominations have similar offerings. The International Mission Board has the Lottie Moon.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that was a great experience for me to just see the church giving sacrificially on a regular basis and starting to develop that habit myself.
Yeah, so great to start that as you were growing up as a kid, and then also that's something we can cultivate as adults too, and be looking
Mhm.
for opportunities not only to serve but to give sacrificially. So that's great.
Yeah.
For our weekly spotlight, we are focusing on our Teach Beyond newsletter. If you aren't ready to serve right now, you can sign up and hear stories about how God is reaching the nations through education all around the globe. Visit teachbeyond.org/news or click on the link in the show notes.
And now back to our conversation. Well, number 8 is attending a missions conference or class. So I'm curious, have you guys had any experiences with this?
Yeah, definitely. So I attended Moody Bible Institute, and every year they have a missions conference for the students. It is required attendance. They cancel classes, and so you have no excuse not to attend. And it's really just a wonderful week full of inspiring, motivating, exciting messages from missionaries all around the world who come to Moody for the week, invest in the lives of the students, and just share with them what the Lord is doing and get them excited about what missions could look like for them someday. I have this really vivid memory actually of a visiting missionary coming onto the floor in our dorm, and we all huddled around her laptop computer, and she played this tribal music that had been recorded for the first time with this new language that they were learning, and
Wow.
they were singing like a worship song that they had written in their language. And I just remember, I don't know, I just felt this strange connection. And again, I mentioned earlier, worshiping God in all of these languages, and to think like, I have no idea what they're saying, but God does. And how cool is that, that I got to just hear a snippet of that. And so I know lots of Christian colleges have missions focus weeks or mission experiences. And so there's an opportunity there for college students to, yeah, really attend to those with an open heart and an open mind, to see what the Lord has to show you in that. Um, it's really a great resource and a great gift to you as a student to get to receive those teachings and those messages. And so,
Mhm.
yeah, my encouragement would be for students to hear that and take advantage of that when you can.
Yeah, yeah. For me, my missions conference experience as a college student wasn't at my university, but it was going
Mhm.
to Urbana Mission Conference, which is specifically for college
Oh,
students. It happens
Mhm.
every 3 years, and actually this is an Urbana year. So here's your reminder that this is an Urbana year, but I was one of those lucky few that had an Urbana year my freshman and senior year. So I attended
Mm.
as a freshman like one semester into college, and then again as a senior, having already applied to Teach Beyond by then.
Oh,
And
wow.
so, when I think about the impact of going to a conference on my missions experience, it's a little hard to know how much was that really the reason that I ended up applying, because it
Mm,
wasn't
mhm.
right before I applied. But I believe that as a freshman, getting to see what God was doing around the world and getting exposed to that kind of planted that seed that then germinated later. And so
Right.
I think it's so
Sure.
important if you're an underclassman, if you're thinking like, well, I don't really know if that's what I want to do yet, that's okay to not know that and to attend and to just see, and the
Mhm.
worst that can happen is you learn other things about how God's at work in the world, you know? And so,
Mhm.
yeah, that's another example of a conference that's not at a specific school. So if you don't have mission conference at your school, check out Urbana Mission Conference, or there's cross conference, other conferences. And why a conference? Well, there's just amazing teaching and learning and
Mhm.
opportunity to connect with other people,
Mhm.
um, and being able to kind of see it come to life. It's real when you're talking to other people who are in the same boat as you. It just kind of brings it to life a little bit more.
Mhm. And interacting with recruiters, which is
Yeah,
my experience with missions conferences. I didn't go as a student, so as a recruiter. So on the other side, I've attended Mission Fest Manitoba and Mission Central in Vancouver. Some amazing mission conferences. And it's neat to see the different generations represented coming together. People who are retired, seeking, what can they do now in their retirement years? Young families who are wondering if something they've been thinking about for years, is it a time to go, and young students who are looking for, what do I do after graduation? And so it's neat to see them all coming together and considering different roles and possibilities, asking questions, with to each of us representing our organizations. And so I've had just amazing conversations, and like you said, there's been fantastic speakers. It's a chance to worship together and just even and grow and hear what God has to say, whether you're
right,
planning to go immediately or whether
right.
that's something as a seed for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I love that the conferences you've experienced are multi-generational, because
Mhm.
this isn't something that is just for students, right? This is, God works through people in all different seasons of life. And so I love that you've had that experience, Amanda. And something else that isn't limited to just students is the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement course. And Perspectives, they have local classes of this kind of all over, and online as well. So, regardless of where you are, there's a way to take that class, and it kind of overviews how God's at work in the world and how, He's always been a God on mission. And so, definitely encourage you to check that out if you're just wanting to learn more about missions in a more academic setting.
Mhm.
So speaking about learning more, there's just the general invitation, number 9, to learn more, to read, to listen, to explore more on your own. So there are just so many resources out there in this
Mhm.
realm. Kind of the possibilities are endless. So what are your recommendations if someone's wanting to learn more about missions opportunities?
Yeah, so when I was first looking to go overseas, podcasts, social media, they weren't really a thing. I didn't really have missions that I could follow.
Same.
I think I think Facebook might have started while I was in college, if that gives you an
Yes,
idea of my age, but,
right.
yeah, when I was younger, our church library often had missionary biographies and stories from the field, and so I grew up kind of reading those and reading about far off places and stories of how the Lord was working, and so I had that experience of just gaining that understanding. But nowadays, with the development of technology and all of the things that we have available to us, I often will recommend podcasts to the students that I'm talking with at recruiting events and that sort of thing. Life gets really busy sometimes, and a podcast is great because you can put it on while you're driving, while you're going for a run. It's a quick little snippet, a little tidbit. And so, yeah, podcasts are my top recommendation.
When we were thinking about going overseas, we actually subscribed to a newsletter from, it's called A Life Overseas, where a group
Mm,
of
yeah.
missionaries share encouragement and experiences. And so you can kind of read and get inspired about the things that they're doing. They also speak reality of there's some challenges, and here's how we seek God in the times that are not easy as well. So that was a really neat newsletter that we would get in our email, and we continue to get that now as well. And the other thing is that we going to Nigeria was, completely new territory for us. And so I actually found a
Mhm.
blog from a family who kind of wrote out their whole journey of how, and they went to the same school and the same thing. So we kind of read through their blog as we
Oh, I love it.
learned about, as we were considering, "Hey, are we gonna go to Nigeria? Is this what we wanna do? Well, how did this family do it?" And we just kind of journeyed along with them through their blog, as a way to kind of learn more, like you said, learn, read, listen, hear about their experience, and what it was like for them to serve in Nigeria. And so, yeah, that was really valuable resources to just kind of prep.
Didn't you coincidentally live in their house too?
We absolutely did, yes.
What? What?
Yes. It's totally a God thing, because I was like,
Yeah.
"Man, what is the housing gonna be like?" And I ended up reading, and, "Oh, okay, these guys, this is what they lived in." They talked about their whole journey in setting up their house. I get to Nigeria, to the same school. I'm like, "What? We're in the same place. Thank you,
That's
God, for just
amazing.
working out the details."
Wow. That's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
cool.
very cool. Something that I've actually been involved with since I've been back is helping at one point to facilitate a small group for people who were considering going. So I had just come back, and there was a small group through my church that was working through the book Mission Smart. And there are other books out there too, but that one kind of just went through different topics to consider before going overseas.
Mhm,
And so I think there's kind of a twofold piece to this. One is reading a book. The other
mhm,
is
Mhm.
working through that in community. And if it is
mhm,
at all possible to
Right.
be in community with other people who are also considering going overseas, there's a lot of value to that as well. Something else that comes to my mind, you mentioned social media before, Rachel, is, following different accounts that will give a real picture. I think about following along on Teach Beyond's account gives a picture of what Teach Beyond's work looks like. But then also, if there's a specific school or specific place that you're looking to go, kind of following along on that is a visual similar to the blog idea that you mentioned, Amanda, that
mhm,
Mhm.
can help just bring that to life. And especially if you have a little time before you can go. It'll give a lot of time to see that story unfold and kind of track with how that is growing and changing and developing, and
mhm.
different initiatives there.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Another great resource that I'll briefly mention is missionroadmap.org from an organization called the Traveling Team that we partner with. This website is just a great overall resource, and actually a lot of the things we've been unpacking today. And it walks you through videos and questions and things to be thinking about. So, accessing that is actually a great way to kind of organize, develop a plan for walking through a lot of what we had talked about today. And we'll link to that in the show notes, just along with all these other resources. So you have access to all these things, whatever stands out to you. Well, our 10th final tip here is to work through our guided journal. So, we in Teach Beyond have created a resource just for people who are at this stage, who are asking the question, is this what God has for me? Do I want to teach overseas? Do I want to serve overseas? But maybe aren't sure yet. So, I think sometimes it just helps to be able to have something to interact with while you're praying, while you're feeling uncertain, while you're waiting on timing. So we have created this journal to kind of walk you through 5 different questions that will help to narrow down to the final question being, what's your next step? And so the journal ends with this point of identifying, well, what's one thing you're going to do to take a step forward? Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be taking a step forward to teaching overseas or to serving in missions, but to kind of narrow it down, what do I want to do to begin on this journey or to take the next step on this journey? So maybe your next step now is doing one of the things that we've already mentioned, getting involved in a church, reading a book, taking a short term trip, something like that. It also could mean that you get to the end of that journal or you get to the end of this podcast and you're like, wait, I think I'm actually ready to have more of a conversation, to
Mhm.
take a step that is the time is now to begin that exploration. We'd love to have a conversation with you. Amanda, Rachel, and I, we serve on a team of people who love just hearing your story and wanting to help you take whatever the next step is for you. So if you're sensing that now is the time to begin having those conversations, we'd love to have you click on the link in the show notes to get connected with us and see where the Lord leads. There's no pressure in those conversations. Again, we're here to help you kind of discern what is next. So as we're coming to that, we've made it through our 10 tips. There's obviously more that we could suggest, but Rachel, Amanda, I'd love to know if anything's coming to your mind in terms of encouragement or something that you would want someone to know if they're in this discernment stage, if they're in this in between stage. What do I do at this time? What do you want them to remember?
Probably the biggest thing that comes to my mind is don't just sit and expect that everything's just going to fall into your lap.
Mhm.
Be proactive. Do some of these things. You don't have to choose all 10, but do
Mhm.
something. Yes, we talked about, prayer being obvious, but really take time to pray. Seek out someone to talk with. Do something to
Mhm.
get involved. And I think and maybe, Heather said reach out to us on a mobilization team to start the conversation. And I think um that's just a great way to be active and to move forward, and God will reveal where he wants each of us to be. And so I think we have to do our part as well and not just expect it to all fall into our
Mhm.
into our
Yeah.
laps. So choose one.
Yeah,
Mm.
and there's this, like, kind of myth of calling that can say that the answer is just gonna be revealed in the sky, and sometimes there are really dramatic ways that the Lord speaks
Oh,
and
for
and
sure.
brings clarity, but you're
Hmm.
right, in doing some of these things, it can be a way to, experience that clarity in new ways to take a step forward.
Right.
Yeah. I would actually echo a lot of what, you said, Amanda. I think about, um, guidance and direction. The Lord can't guide you if you're not in motion. Like,
Mm,
if you are just sitting in one place and you're stationary, you can't be directed.
mm,
So, putting yourself in motion, taking that next step, it could be a small step, but always being on the lookout for what is the next thing right now that the Lord is calling me into? What is the next step? As long as you're continuing to move forward, He'll be able to guide you and lead you in the direction that He wants you to go.
yeah, yeah, so good. All right. Well, you know how we always end this podcast. Every week on the show, we ask our guests what's changing your life this week. So I'll start and then pass it off to Amanda and then Rachel. So, what's changing my life? You have both already heard me talk about this, but there was recently Gather 25, which was this gathering of the global church virtually hosted by Jenny Allen and with different hosts kind of throughout the world. And um, I was just so impressed by the magnitude of this event and just the production element of it, like, to host something virtually across 25 hours with all these different time zones and seamless technology. But also the reminder of how God is at work around the world. That was kind of the goal,
Mm,
that God is on the move all over the world. And in my little corner or in your little corner, wherever you're listening from, like, God is at work right there in our neighborhoods. He's with us. And he's
mm,
also at work in Rwanda, in the UK, in New Zealand, in India, all these different places. And we've been talking about this already in this conversation a little bit, but just watching Gather 25 was such a good reminder of this, that we serve a big God and that he is working. So that is actually something you can find online and watch if you're interested in watching Gather 25. It's available online. But that was what's changing my life lately.
Yeah.
Amanda, what about for you?
What's changing my life this week is something very practical, and
Love it.
thrift stores. The answer is thrift stores.
That's
I
so
did
good.
some shopping recently for my daughter for costumes and props for the school play that she's in.
Fun.
The one
mm,
who's going on the missions trip, she needed some clothes and stuff to have for working on the project that they're doing
Sure.
there. And of course,
Perfect.
then that means you're purging some things in your house as well. So I went to the thrift store to get some things, and I also brought 2 bags of
So good.
things to drop off. So for me, thrift stores are just the thing I needed to do this week. So that was great.
Oh,
Love it.
great. Rachel, what
Love
about
it.
you? What's changing your life this week?
Yeah, mine is also a super practical thing, pakas.
Okay.
Pakas are socks that are made with alpaca wool,
Oh,
Mm,
wow.
and I got some for Christmas, so they've been changing my life for a while now, but, they're I just love them so much. They're like a little treat for my feet. They're breathable, they're cushy, they're warm, they're cozy, and it just is like a fun little thing to slip my feet into some warm socks.
yes.
Working from home, I don't wear shoes a lot during the daytime, and yeah, it's
Cozy
just great to put
socks.
That's
on my little cozy socks.
That's so
love
good.
that.
I love
Yeah.
it. Good. Well, thank you both so much for joining me for this conversation. It was great to be able to talk through these 10 things
Mhm.
and just to share this conversation with each of you.
Yeah,
Mm.
my pleasure.
That was super fun to sit down with you guys.
It was great to hear you three talk about this. I know these are conversations you've had all the time, and these are such helpful suggestions.
Well, I'm curious, Kian, as you were listening to our 10 tips, were there any of these things that were especially helpful to you and Sarah when you guys were first considering serving overseas?
Yeah, I think the joining a mission-minded church was a big one.
Mm,
I think even before we were thinking about serving overseas, just as we were looking at churches, the calling on the church to be missional and seeing that as a priority in the church was huge for us. So
yeah.
that's kind of where we gravitated to, and that did help us develop as we ended up going to serve overseas and kind of building that community around us.
Yeah, yeah, that's so great. And that's where we started this conversation that these things can be valuable for our growth and edification wherever we are, whether we serve in missions or not, right? These are beneficial now and then could be helpful as we continue to grow and aim for that. So, we mentioned a number of different resources during this episode: conferences, books, our downloadable journal. So, just a reminder that you can find links to all of that in the show notes, which are available in your podcast player or on our website at teachbeyond.org/podcast.
And as Heather mentioned at the end, if you sense that this is the time to begin a conversation with Teach Beyond, fill out our quick form at teachbeyond.org/go, which is of course linked in the show notes as well.
Kian, Rachel, Amanda, and I all serve with an organization called Teach Beyond. As you have heard, education plays a big role in missions, and Teach Beyond is a part of that.
As followers of Jesus, Teach Beyond is a global community providing transformational education services as part of God's ongoing mission to transform individuals and communities into all He intends.
Want to learn more and get involved? Visit teachbeyond.org or follow us on social media.
To help more people find the podcast and hear about Teach Beyond, we'd love it if you would leave a rating or review and share the show with a friend. Be sure you're subscribed or following the show on the platform where you listen so you never miss an episode.
And as always, you can reach us at podcast@teachbeyond.org. We'll see you next week.